the recording. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, Leveraging Azure AD and Cirrus Identity Bridge to meet the NIH MFA mandate. I have one of your co-presenters here today, Corey Lee, currently a Zero Trust architect here at Microsoft, and I focus on all Microsoft security, compliance, and identity solutions, specifically in education. I am joined here today with the Cirrus Identity team, and I'll go ahead and allow Deidre, my co-presenter here, to go ahead and introduce herself. Deidre, it looks like you might be on mute right now. The infamous.
Thanks, Corey. Sorry about that. I'm Deidre Chamberlain. I'm the founder and CEO of Cirrus Identity.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that. And we are also joined here today with a few guest speakers that I'll go ahead and introduce at this time. One of our guest speakers here today is Catherine Stevenson, Executive Director, Enterprise Technical Services at University of Louisville. And our other guest presenter here today is Philip Lyle, Assistant Vice President, Enterprise and Research Infrastructure at Chapman University. So we have a pretty interesting and jam-packed session here for you today. So I want to go ahead and get things kicked off. Just a brief overview of today's webinar. Why are we here today? We are here primarily to talk about some of the requirements that exist, specifically one requirement in particular around the National Institute for Health, really looking to move towards an increased security posture around electronic research administration data access. As we're looking to help customers evaluate these requirements while also look towards leveraging solutions, namely in this case, Microsoft solutions to help satisfy those requirements, we really want to make sure that we were engaging the community and having a conversation on what the options were on that front. So as we approach the September 15th deadline, one of the goals and objectives is to make sure that there's a decent amount of information out there in regards to what are the solutions that can help support that requirement. So we will be walking through a solution today that does involve Microsoft Azure Active Directory from an identity provider perspective, as well as some of the Azure MFA capabilities in conjunction with the Cirrus Identity solution, specifically the Bridge solution, where we've recently established a partnership and we've released the Cirrus Bridge application to the Azure Active Directory Azure App Gallery to make it super easy for our customers to deploy this solution and quickly get to the point where they can configure and meet those requirements. Just some of the things that we've heard along this journey of really starting to evaluate the identity requirements in education and look across many of the scenarios that revolve around Microsoft technology or research or scenarios where institutions are looking to, let's just say, modernize their identity infrastructure. That we've heard from some customers looking to really evaluate options around what can they do to maintain their in-common participation today, leveraging Azure Active Directory, as well as what are those scenarios where they can potentially look towards moving away from existing deployments that maybe are leveraging things like Active Directory, federation services in the on-premises environment for some of those in common access type scenarios. So with that being said, we'll move on to the next slide here. So as I mentioned briefly, at a high level, you can think of this solution as a combo solution that really brings to bear the power of Azure Active Directory and the Cirrus Identity Bridge. So for customers that are looking to and currently leveraging Azure Active Directory, but looking to use the Cirrus Bridge solution, there is a quick and easy way to go and navigate in the Azure Active Directory application gallery, looking for Cirrus Bridge for Azure AD, and deploy that application in your Azure AD environment. As I mentioned previously, this solution really is meant to address some of those multilateral federation scenarios, specifically in the education environment context, primarily around making sure that we're mapping the appropriate attributes to the appropriate claims with respect to some of the integrations, that we're also ensuring that we're able to satisfy some of those requirements around presenting MFA claims to support some of the security requirements around NIH and/or research access. So at a high level, you'll see this is just a quick snapshot of what this solution looks like on the diagram on the screen here. Fairly straightforward flow with respect to the authentication process, where Azure Active Directory really able to do what it's good at doing, authenticating users and managing some of those additional capabilities that customers get today, like Azure AD Identity Protection or Azure MFA, as well as the expanded use of things like conditional access on behalf of applications that sit behind some of those research scenarios. So we'll be going into some of the detail around that here in the webinar shortly, but just that's a quick overview of what we're really here to talk about today and many of the components that go into this solution that we'll be reviewing. Next slide. All right, so just, for anyone that's in attendance today that's wondering, well, does this apply to me? Am I a customer that can see value from this solution? Here are just some of the target education customer or customer profiles that exist that we do believe will see a lot of value from this particular solution. But once again, it doesn't stop there. Whether it's an institution that's simply looking to join the InCommon Federation and specifically leverage Azure Active Directory as their identity provider, great opportunity for customers to leverage the solution in that context, or for customers that are more importantly looking in some cases to expand their use of cloud identity and move to the cloud. They're shifting applications to the cloud, and once again, they want to be able to maintain some form of existing access to the InCommon Federation. Or lastly, customers that are just looking to, once again, continue to deploy and move forward with some of their Azure Active Directory capabilities while still being able to maintain some of that legacy application support for scenarios where applications require things like CAS authentication in the environment. So whether you fit in bucket 1, 2, or 3, we feel there's a solution for you. But once again, it still doesn't stop there. So we'll talk through some additional scenarios with our guest panelists here about some of the existing ways in which we may be able to leverage these solutions. All right. So at this time, I'll hand it over to my co-host Deidre, and we'll talk about some of the Cirrus Identity solutions available.
Thanks so much, Corey. Sorry about the echo. Hopefully that will go away. I'm going to keep talking and hope there it goes. All right. So I'm Deidre, as I said earlier, founder and CEO of Cirrus Identity. We are a company that was founded by people who work in identity management in higher education, and we currently serve over 60 universities and colleges around the world. We were founded in 2013 by myself. I used to run the identity management program at UC Berkeley. Did that for almost a decade myself. And our whole team, our CTO, our director of product and customer success, who's on the call today, we all came from higher ed environments. And so we have lived through some of the identity management challenges that you're trying to solve on your campuses. And so you can see there some of the folks that you'll encounter if you work with us. Karen Kato, also on this slide, she used to work at UC Berkeley where we met, and she helps us with marketing sales. So Karen and Mark are some of the first folks that you'll come in contact with if you contact us for more information. I'm going to start with just some high-level architecture slides. One of the most popular requests we get is for our SAML bridge, which will enable campuses to connect their Azure Active Directory identity provider here on the bottom of the slide with applications, service providers up here at the top of the slide. A lot of universities are hoping to migrate the majority of their SAML-based applications directly to Azure Active Directory and essentially use Microsoft Azure AD as their primary single sign-on identity provider. One of the gaps that comes up there is around multilateral federation. You can't register your Microsoft Azure Active Directory identity provider directly with InCommon. And so the Cirrus Bridge is a product that will fill that gap. And as Corey mentioned, it's now available in the Azure AD application gallery. And so with the Cirrus Bridge, you can register your Azure AD IDP identity provider in the InCommon Federation or other EduGain federations like the Canadian Access Federation, the UK Federation. We also have we built some implementation patterns that will help you migrate from existing identity providers that you may have registered in a federation. I'll describe that a bit more later. Or if you're brand new to the federation, we can walk you through registration with a federation like InCommon, because we've had a lot of experience with that. Another gap that we often fill is with universities and colleges that have leveraged CAS, another open source project for single sign-on. They may have tens or hundreds of applications that are using CAS for single sign-on, but they have a long-term strategy of migrating their applications to the SAML authentication protocol and using Azure AD as their primary single sign-on endpoint. The Cirrus Bridge can serve as a stopgap to sort of continue enabling CAS authentication to applications as they get migrated over to SAML and natively authenticate against Azure AD. And some campuses, have these legacy apps, a lot of them homegrown, that they don't think will ever be able to migrate to SAML for authentication, in which case they can run our Cirrus Bridge as a gap filler. And we do have some universities that use both our CAS and our SAML bridges. And when we do, we'll talk a little bit more about our business model and subscriptions. If people do need both bridges, we can offer a discount on the second bridge. I'll just add here as well that sometimes people will start off using the CAS bridge as part of a migration strategy, and then that will fade out of their subscription over time as they migrate all their applications over to SAML. I mentioned earlier we have some different implementation paths that we've established over the years. One of them is something that we call our DNS Addon. And this is something that we offer because it makes it easier for campuses to migrate from using something like Shibboleth or Simple SAML PHP on-prem and migrating, maybe they already have an identity provider that's registered in InCommon, and their goal is to migrate to the Cirrus Bridge with Azure AD as the SSO endpoint. One option is that you set up a whole new identity provider in the InCommon Federation and you migrate applications one at a time. That can be really time consuming and also difficult to deal with all the application owners. So for those campuses that prefer just a one-time cutover, a big bang implementation, we can set up the Cirrus Bridge and have you on your campus register a CNAME and your DNS entry for that. We can also work with you to migrate your signing key from your Shibboleth or SSP implementation to our bridge. And that way, once you've done some testing with our new bridge, you can do a DNS cutover and migrate all the traffic from your existing apps to the new bridge. And we've done that with quite a few campuses. This screen just shows you the NIH Compliance Check. We have a pretend university that we call the Athena Institute. And so Mark, our Director of Product and Customer Success, went through the process of authenticating one of our services that we have in our pretend university using the Azure AD bridge, connecting to the test app for the NIH security requirements and showing that with the bridge you can meet both the MFA and the RNS, Research and Scholarship requirements. I'm going to back up just for a second here. I'm going to just describe that a little bit more with our architecture slide. So in the SAML bridge, we do a couple things in terms of out-of-the-box configuration settings that gets you ready to meet those NIH requirements right away. One of them is we will, by default, release the RNS bundle of attributes to any service provider that's tagged as a research and scholarship service provider in the Federation metadata. That's one of the requirements that NIH has stipulated because it makes it much, much easier for them to share their research platform with multiple campus identity providers. They don't have to reach out to every single identity provider to request attribute release. Because their services are tagged as research and scholarship, our bridge will automatically release those research and scholarship attributes. And we'll work with campuses to make sure that the mapping within Azure AD is done correctly so that those attributes get released properly. And the second thing this bridge does is the multi-factor authn context, which is another specification. That means that the RNS, excuse me, the NIH applications that require MFA. When the authentication request comes through our bridge, we know MFA is required. When we send the user off to log in with Azure Active Directory, if they have not performed multi-factor authentication when the response comes back to our bridge, we will deny their access to the application. And of course, you can have multiple applications behind this bridge. Some of them may require MFA, some of them may not. And coming in the very near future, we'll be launching conditional access capabilities so that you can set up application-specific rules around MFA and attribute release that will be configurable in the Azure AD portal and respected by the Cirrus bridge. So with that, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to say for now, and I want to pass it on to, I can come back to this slide about implementation. It's typically 2 to 8 weeks to implement, depending on the complexity of your environment. I'd like to pass it on now to our first guest speaker, Philip Lyle from Chapman University, who uses the Cirrus Bridge and Azure AD to join in common.
Thanks, Deidre, and I appreciate everybody's time today. I'll try to keep it fairly brief, and I'd be happy to take your questions at the end. So first off, I want to say that no one has paid me or coerced me to say anything on today's call. In fact, I don't think anybody knows what I'm going to say. But I am a big fan of both the Cirrus Identity Bridge as well as Azure Active Directory. In fact, even though we use a variety of products at Chapman University, I think Azure Active Directory has actually been one of the best ones for us. Just to level set a little bit, we're a medium-sized university. We're the third largest private university in California. We have around 10,000 students. When I started with Chapman over 6 years ago, we did a lot of LDAP authentication. We never deployed SHIB, we never deployed CAS. We didn't have these capabilities. We had on-premise Active Directory federation services. And we had desired to move to a centralized identity platform. And this was also around the time, as all of you probably know, that multi-factor authentication was starting to grow in popularity as well. And so when we started going down that track, we evaluated Azure Active Directory to be our identity provider in a hybrid implementation. And we really enjoyed it. We really liked the value proposition. We love the conditional access. It's been a fantastic solution for the university. Our information security department loves it. So I really, I know I'm kind of raving here, but I think it actually is a really compelling value proposition, and I'm happy to talk more about it. But one of our gaps, really was that, as Deidre pointed out earlier, that we couldn't integrate with in-common federation, and we were finding more and more use cases where they just, we couldn't get Azure Active Directory to directly integrate, and it wasn't too common. I would say, even most shibboleth SAML implementations, we were able to get working with Azure directly. But we recently became an R2, and so things like the NIH MFA requirement are starting to matter to us as an institution, and so it was important that we could fill in these remaining gaps where federation was going to be absolutely necessary. And this is where, Cirrus came into play. I would say from start to finish, it was probably one of the easiest projects I ever had to deal with. In fact, I didn't really have to deal with it much. I just had to have one of my managers work with Mark and team on the implementation. Really, from we were not federated, as I described. Cirrus helped us through that process from start to finish. It was more around just making sure we had access into the in-common platform. We had the right RAOs to approve that integration. They helped us perform the federation, ensure that was working, and then helped us integrate all the initial specific apps that we were looking to do. So certainly the NIH compliance, which is certainly done and now in place for our researchers. But we also have an EDUCAUSE integration. We have a DMP tool integration in progress, and several more that we're thinking about in the pipeline now. And it's just great to have that capability, because now I know that we can handle all of our SSO identity integrations, across the spectrum now with this product in place. And then the last thing I'll say before I hand it off to our next partner here is that I also like that Cirrus was able to grow with our university in terms of usage. This isn't a six-figure implementation for us. It's not incredibly costly. I think a lot of solutions out there, might have a large uplift to get started, and that's just not what we saw here. We're able to size it based on our usage, which, again, for Chapman, we're a growing research institution. We have some researchers who work with NIH, but it's not, in the hundreds. It's not in the, a huge volume today, but we hope to get there. And I love that we were able to get going with Cirrus at something that was really cost effective and, again, just really easy to do. And so thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Catherine now.
Thanks very much, Philip. Let me advance the slide now. Go ahead, Catherine.
So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. We've had similar experiences as Chapman. The University of Louisville, we're a bit larger. We're Research One. And being a Research One, federated services, federated authentication is very important to us for collaborative reasons. And we joined in common some years ago and put a shibboleth implementation in our data center to provide that bridge into the environment. And it's worked well for us, but we have a fairly small staff working on identity and access management, and shibboleth, for all of its power, can be a bit of a temperamental beast. So when I took over our identity and access management practice a couple of years ago, I decided to completely reimagine it and try to focus on Azure Active Directory as our source of truth for as many authentication decisions as possible. Going into this, I think we had 4 separate authentication sources, each of which was considered authoritative. And this multi-year evolution we're doing is trying to get that down ideally to just the one. We love doing SAML integrations directly against Azure Active Directory. They are so simple that even I in the manager seat have done one successfully. But in common was a challenge for us because as has been stated, you simply cannot connect in common directly to Azure Active Directory. And that's where we've had great success with our bridge implementation. It was easy enough that I didn't realize they were done with it until they told me. So that's the most ringing endorsement that I can provide. It's practically invisible to us getting it up and running. We are unable to do the big bang, easy button cutover. Our authentication environment's just too complicated to facilitate that. So we've been moving one application after another off of shibboleth onto the bridge, which is why when you look at our identity services, you see that we have the University of Louisville and the University of Louisville new throughout this migration. And we're hoping to have that wrapped up early in 2022. It's just trying to avoid rocking the academic boat any more than necessary. The National Institutes of Health are an extremely important partner for us, source of a great deal of our grant money. So we were keenly interested in being compliant with the NIH services. And using the bridge had the added benefit of I didn't have to figure out how to integrate MFA with SHIP. We simply got to skip that step entirely. So rather than fighting that, we just made it part of our bridge implementation project. So from our perspective here at the University of Louisville, we see the bridge as giving us the best of both worlds. We get the simplicity and scalability of Azure Active Directory as the single source of identity, and we get all the benefits of multilateral federation through InCommon and our other SAML partners. I'll turn it back over.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you, Philip. We really appreciate, I think, it's the best testament to the success of these solutions together to hear from campuses that have actually implemented. And at this point, we're going to pause and turn it over to Q&A. And Corey, I don't know if this is where you unrecord the session.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for attending, and at this point, we'll shift into the Q&A portion of today's session, and we'll actually stop the recording just in case anyone's concerned about being recorded or having their questions show up on the recording. So once again, I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar on leveraging Azure AD and Cirrus Identity Bridge to meet the NIH MFA mandate.